a team from Toronto, Canada.
Yes.
We the North are now we the champions.
I'm sorry guys, I was just watching some highlights from the NBA Finals. And as you probably already know, Toronto Raptors took it. I'm super happy about it. I was in Toronto for the game and the entire city just went crazy. It was the most intense, most special moment I've ever had living in Toronto. We had hundreds and thousands of people on the streets celebrating such an amazing victory, and I'm super happy for all the Toronto fans around the world. I'm also very happy for the Raptors themselves. So good job, team. I'm really proud. Now, you're probably wondering where am I, because I'm clearly in a hotel right now. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. and I'm working on a very special project with a client, which is the Conrad Washington, D.C. hotel. And I've had this incredible opportunity to kind of look around, experience Washington, get a good feel for it, and at the same time be able to experience this hotel and all the amazing amenities that it has. This is probably one of the most nicest hotels I've ever stayed in. It's very thought through. There's amazing architectural focus. The building also has a very beautiful art collection that they've sourced in from locally and around the United States. These artists have done an incredible job in really putting together their pieces, and I can't wait to show you guys that. And on that note, I actually want to talk to you about what today's video topic is. I was thinking to myself as I was shooting the space and kind of getting comfortable with it, it'd be a really good opportunity to talk to you guys about what process I take when I'm shooting interiors. Interiors of different architectural buildings, really focusing on the things that I think about and the process I would take in shooting them. So this video is dedicated to that. I'm going to walk you guys through the hotel so you can get an experience of what it looks like, and I hope that you guys do someday come to Washington and stay here at the Conrad. But before we get into all that stuff, you always know it's B-roll time, so let's get it. Alright guys, so the very first thing that I always think about before even doing anything is composition. You want to go around and take a look in the space, you want to get comfortable with it, and you have to start to think about how you're going to be composing your images. Composition is very important when shooting interior spaces. Careful thought in how you shoot the space and the angles you explore will determine the look and feel of the space. So you have to be very aware of leading lines, white space, depth, and balance, and the roles they play in differentiating from a decent photo to a well-composed photo. Make sure you get a variety of different images, from tight, medium, and wide shots. So typically when I'm about to take a picture, I try to think about how I can alter it by putting things in front of it, giving a sense of depth of field, by understanding the way that light bounces off of items, or really thinking about what are the key features I want to emphasize. And this is something I do constantly. It's not a one-time process, and even when I take the image and I'm content with it, I still go around and alter my perspective just to see if I can get a different angle. This comes very handy when you're traveling and you're trying to photograph things and you don't want them to look like everyone else's. You gotta play around, maybe mix it up a little bit. Even allowing a subject to be in the image can give it a sense of life as well and give it a lot more character. So point number 2 is probably the most crucial one in shooting interiors, is thinking about how to utilize natural light. The key when shooting interiors is to keep the space looking natural and real, hence the importance of shooting in natural light. Best times to photograph to maximize natural light inside would be between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., transitioning from softer to brighter light. If you feel the need to open up the shadows, then opt for a large reflector to bounce light, or potentially use an external light source like a strobe or a flash. With flash, always remember it's best to diffuse the light or bounce the light off of surfaces to keep it more natural and a better look and feel. Now for the space that we're currently in, we're in the foyer area of the hotel. There's a bar right in front of me and a restaurant to my right. There's a lot of interesting spaces that have been designed here to really cultivate the lighting source that's coming in. This is a very good opportunity to create content with natural light coming into the space. Right now is the best time to shoot because the light is coming in, it's flooding the space, and it's creating a lot of interesting contrast with the shadows and the lighter spots. Something to think about is actually not just how to bounce the light off, but when you're doing the post-production process, you want to remember that you don't want to create too much contrast. You have to minimize the contrast. And a good way of doing this is pulling up the shadows and really thinking about the blacks and the deep whites and making sure that you neutralize certain tones and certain colors to emphasize the space as much as possible. One thing I always do is play with colors. So there's a lot of natural wooden, warm colors in the space, so I'll make sure I pump those in terms of saturation to make sure that they pop. Alright guys, so the next very important talking point is all about aperture and how valuable it is to think about the aperture when you're shooting in any space. Something to consider is that whenever you shoot with a higher aperture, you retain sharpness across the entire frame. So typically a good starting point is about 5.6 and higher. This is your best bet for keeping everything in focus and capturing with all accuracy. Also, depending on the space, you might also want to capture softer shots as well. This will require a wider aperture between f2 and maybe f4. The aperture is also very important to think about when you're getting detail shots. So right now we're currently in the Sakura Lounge. This is a very private lounge that the hotel offers to certain guests depending on where they're staying. It's a beautiful space and it has a lot of small little decorative pieces that give it that little bit more character. And something that you wish to consider when you're shooting spaces is not only getting the wide shot but also those detail shots and having a low aperture. I also have an 85mm f1.2 with me. I'm going to get really cool tight detail shots using that very wide aperture. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about is choosing the right lenses, and this is specifically to do with the fact that you don't want to go too wide or too close to the subject that you're shooting. And determining the right focal length is very important to getting the type of photos that a client would be happy with. So the sun has set here in Washington and it's a little bit darker in the room, so I'm going to use my tripod just to make sure that I'm getting a sturdy shot. And I'm going to also play around with the shutter speed to see the variety of different shots that I can get in the space. And the most important thing to note here is to take your time and really get comfortable in the space. Think about it. If you're actually going to be utilizing this space, where would you position yourself? How comfortable could you make the space look? And since this is a dining area, you have to remember that shooting too wide can distort the image and therefore not be entirely representative of the space. So you want to keep it simple and realistic. You'll definitely need to try different focal lengths that match the space and your style. To avoid distortion, I like to use a 24mm focal length. And for tighter, more detailed shots, I'd opt for a 50mm or even an 85mm. Also, shooting at waist level or slightly higher above a neutral perspective of any room, so a tripod could be recommended here, makes things a lot easier to photograph. I want to make sure that the perspective is what you would see if you were sitting down and having a meal. So we're here back in my room and I'm going to talk to you about the last point, which is a very simple thing to do. It's called keeping it clean. So what I mean by that is you have to make sure that you prepare the space and remove any clutter that might interrupt the vibe and the balance of the space. That said, do not be afraid to be creative. Feel free to add certain pieces that might help elevate the lifestyle vibe. Perhaps magazines or some books. They could really add a certain ambience in a room or living space. The space should be stylish and inspire your audience. Just before we call it a night, I want to say I hope you enjoyed today's video. Like I said in the beginning, it's a very challenging thing to do interior photography the right way, and there never is a right way. It's always a learning experience, it's always a challenge, and you have to take it step by step. And I hope that some of these tips I provided you give you some sort of direction and allow you to be a little bit more creative and expressive in the content that you capture. We are currently standing in front of the United States Capitol building. I'm extremely mesmerized by this beautiful structure. It is incredible. It is very big. It might look small on the camera right now, but I hope that you guys someday come to DC and experience this place for yourself. We've done a lot of learning here, and we've checked out a lot of interesting places in terms of architecture, design, history, you name it. And we had a wonderful time staying at the Conrad, Washington, DC. That's where you have to stay when you come visit. And that's it for today's video. I do hope that you guys like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, I'll see you all next week. Peace!